The Who's Tommy obviously is based on a concept album by The Who, one of the great rock bands of all time. I think Rolling Stone said the Mount Rushmore of rock bands are the Beatles, Rolling Stones, U2, and The Who. Sure. Those are the four that they consider to be the round. And so the fact that what was interesting is that they turned this classic album into a Broadway musical that was one of the first shows that I ever saw on Broadway when I first moved to the city. Yeah. And it was one of the most exciting experiences that I've ever had in the theater. And to have, this classic rock band like create this Broadway musical is very, very exciting. Obviously, it's about, but what's also interesting, and I think, it's about a young boy who has a traumatic experiences and completely shuts down. And so there's something, I think, sort of, and is able to sort of reemerge and back into the world. So there's something interesting about that story, about someone who, a young person completely shutting themselves off from the rest of the world because of the PTSD that they've had. It's got some of the greatest songs ever written. Pinball Wizard, obviously, which is an amazing. And I think that doing it in the space, like I said, it's going to be immersive. We're going to be in the round. It's going to be thrilling. The second show is Big the Musical. Okay. Big the Musical has had a problematic sort of life to it. Yep. I originally saw it on Broadway, and it's based on the classic Tom Hanks movie from the 80s. About a young boy who, puts a coin in a Zoltar machine and then wakes up the next morning and he's now a 30-year-old man. So it's a young 10-year-old boy who's now 30, and he has to exist in the world as a young boy in a man's body. It has a book by John Weidman, who wrote Assassins, and a score by Richard Maltby and David Shire, who have done Richard Maltby was the director of Amos Behaven originally, and they've written a ton of stuff, and it's not done a lot. Yeah. I'm actually friends with John Weidman, who wrote the book, and I've worked with Richard Maltby before, and I've been in contact with him and just said, hey, we're doing this. And Susan Stroman, who's the original choreographer. Yeah. So I even texted her the other day and said, I'm doing Big, and she was very excited about it. So, I think that giving this an opportunity is for us to sort of re-look at this show that doesn't get done a lot. And like I said, it incorporates a lot of kids from the community, which I think is important. The next show is The Mountaintop, which is Martin Luther King, and it's the night before. He's at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, the night before he's assassinated. And he has a visitor who comes to him and sort of discusses, he's having sort of a crisis of faith about whether what he's done has been meaningful, which I think is sort of an interesting sort of look at Martin Luther King, because his life is about to end the next day. And I won't go any further than that, but I think it's a two-hander, very powerful play. And then A Doll's House Part 2, which was a show that was done on Broadway with Laurie Metcalf starred in it originally. And it's a sequel to Ibsen's A Doll's House, which is a classic play. And what I would love to do is I would love to do a stage reading of A Doll's House, and then just so people have the context of the play before we do Doll's House. The play is all about female empowerment. It's about a woman who decides to leave. At the end of A Doll's House, she leaves her husband and her children in a time when that was you didn't do it and illegal. So and that's part of the problem, is that you can't leave unless you get a divorce. The crux of the play is that she comes back 15 years later and finds out that her husband never signed the divorce papers. So she has been living, because she's had other men, she's literally been committing a crime, and which is so interesting that a woman having adultery would have been considered a crime. So it's sort of dealing, and in reading it, it's dealing with the ideas of marriage, of what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a wife, it sort of explores relationships. Even though it takes place in the 1800s, it's really a reflection on today. And actually, the dialogue is actually contemporary, and the style of the show is contemporary, even though it's set in the 1800s.
It sounds like you have a little something for everyone.
Yeah, and one more, Midsummer. Yeah. Midsummer Night's Dream is my favorite Shakespeare play, and we have a wonderful opportunity to, I think, with Shakespeare, as we're doing with Romeo and Juliet, is to share with the students and schools around the community. We have a student performance today for Romeo and Juliet, which we have some high schools that are in there to sing it. And we're going to do the same with Midsummer.
Yeah.
Midsummer is going to be a show that we want to present to the community, present to young people, to have them experience Shakespeare.